I would like just to start with 3 different questions, but with the first one, very open one, about culture. I would like to ask you, Ed, when we look at your concept of culture over time, you know, it started in '85 and it developed into today. What is your latest observation about the application or implementation of the concept of culture among practitioners, managers, consultants, and maybe also research? Just to give a short impression of where is the field moving and what are you seeing as puzzling questions or observations. Because Schein was always the keynote speaker in the 4 different conferences. The first topic in 2006 was transition transformation, where career anchor and all those concepts were key. Then the second one was transformation and leadership, because we found out it's actually the leaders who are the main persons for the change processes. And then the next one was, the third one was inspiration and organization, where we asked, you know, what happens to inspiration with the leaders and managers throughout their career. And actually now the question is, what is happening in the field of culture? What are you observing?
Well, okay, culture. I think it's fair to start with what was I conscious of when the culture topic first arose in my own mind in the early '80s, because I was at that time consulting both with Digital Equipment Corporation, a bunch of startup engineers, electrical engineers, in the U.S. with a very Protestant U.S.-style leader, Ken Olson, and alternately, I had been recruited in '79-'80 to do a workshop on career anchors in Ciba-Geigy, because their head of development, who worked directly for the CEO, the chair of the KL, their top group, they thought that innovation wasn't what it should be in Ciba-Geigy. And the career anchor thing implies that different people can be creative, not just the creative artist, but that managers also can be creative. And they particularly wanted their international management to have a sense of that, so they agreed to have me come to their annual meeting where all the people met to talk about career anchors, which for me, the big learning experience was the difference between walking into digital and walking into Ciba-Geigy. It was like different planets, you know. In one case, an old mill with a bunch of engineers constantly arguing with each other. In Ciba-Geigy in Basel, like walking into a cathedral, you know, everything very silent, doors closed. And I noticed then what I think has become the biggest pathology in culture, namely the ignoring of what was a national difference, Swiss-German versus American, a technology difference, chemistry versus electrical engineering, a company age difference, Ciba-Geigy, an old merged company, and digital, a startup of about 10 years in age. And out of that, I did talk then about organizational culture, but somehow all these other cultural elements, industry culture, national culture, the kind of people who are connected to a particular task, whether you're an electrical engineer or whether you're an airline pilot or whether you're a chemist in Ciba-Geigy, to me those all reflect cultural dimensions. And we say yes, 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 but when I see what consultants are doing with culture, and even worse, what managers are doing with culture, the only part that they've really picked up on is, oh yes, culture is values, and I need to change, so I want some new values, so I want a culture program, and the culture piece is the new values I'm going to acquire. And what is already there, who they really are, how they really think, what their task really demands of them, is kind of forgotten. All the emphasis on, okay, innovation, let's have a culture of innovation. I've just come from this conference in Ascona, which ETH and MIT sponsored, on the problems of safety across national and technological organizations. So if you compare medicine and airlines and mines and fishing, are the safety problems similar or different? And I thought this is going to be very interesting because that'll force them to look at everything. And the only thing they looked at was the characteristics of what has been quite stupidly called safety culture. It's the nuclear industry that has latched onto this notion of safety culture, forgetting that culture is a property of a group. Culture can't be a property of a concept. You see? Safety isn't, it's a concept. So the culture of a concept a priori doesn't make any sense. You can say the culture of an airline, and how do they deal with safety culturally, or the culture of a nuclear plant, and how do they deal with the safety problems. But safety culture as a general concept to be evolved that could apply to all these different high hazard industries is nonsense, and they kind of know it, but the managers love it. It's a way of simplifying things. And when you say, well, what is safety culture? What they produce, primarily produced in Vienna by the IAEA and by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Agency and by the INPO, the Institute for Nuclear Power Operations, which is an internal consultant. Safety culture turns out to be a list. And on that list is a highly involved CEO, a shared sense of responsibility for the safety of our organization, a deep understanding of our technology. And it's all the characteristics of what one might find in an effective organization. And it is also all the characteristics of what one might find in a safe organization. The trap is, the minute you bring them all together and call it a culture, you've lost the point that if any one of those things isn't working very well, you're going to have neither a safe organization nor an effective organization. So you can't put them all together and say, okay, that's our culture, when in fact it's 7 or 8 discrete aspects of how an organization works. And misses in that point what I kept trying to articulate, the task of a nuclear operator in a control room trying to maintain safety, and the task of a fisherman going out in bad weather trying to catch a lot of fish and come back safely, are so totally different that to try to have a concept of safety that cuts across industries and ignore the different industrial tasks is, again, a priori nonsensical to me. And then you add national culture. You remember that Ciba-Geigy had the thalidomide disaster of a drug that produced deformed babies. Very serious. The company probably, it took decades to recover from that. So in the pharmaceutical industry, safety is putting something out there that may not hurt the employee, but that years later may hurt a customer that will funnel back into a very, very bad situation for the company. And how is that similar to running an airline where the safety is immediate and in front of you all the time? So to apply the word culture to this seems to me silly. Each company does have a culture, and that culture is a mixture of subcultures based on the occupations of the people running that organization, and those occupations are a direct reflection of the tasks that that company is trying to perform. So the digital electrical engineers have an engineering culture of their own. But the Ciba-Geigy chemical engineers, both engineers, but they were quite different in terms of attitude and mentality. So you have to introduce the concept of professional cultures. The organization may have a history that gives it an organizational culture, but underneath that are a bunch of professional cultures of the people who've been hired to do that kind of work, who have their own shared assumptions. And they all come from different countries. So what we see now in healthcare is what's it like to create a team where the senior surgeon may be an American. In this book, guys, that I will talk about in a minute, I lay out this hypothetical surgical group. The senior surgeon is actually the son of a British lord who was also a surgeon, and he's a very talented surgeon. His anesthesiologist is a Japanese resident who's in London at that point doing his residency. His main nurse is a young American who is there because she's well trained and found a job in London. And the tech is a lower class London kid. And they have to function as a tight mutual helping organization. So picture what all the cultural issues are. The issues of nationality, the issue of religion, the issue of training. And so when someone comes and says, I'd like to hear your thoughts about how I can create a culture of innovation, I breathe a heavy breath and say, well, we have to back up a little bit and ask, do you understand what culture is before we talk about changing something at the fringes of a business organization?